Anna, it seems like you and I have done so much in such a short amount of time. It's almost as though we have lived multiple lives. You and I both share in common the fact that you are on the track to become a certified registered nurse anesthetist. I'm already a nurse anesthetist. We both were ICU nurses in pretty intense environments, and also have had just some really unique life experiences in a short amount of time, like getting married and divorced at a young age. In this episode, I would really love to get into how we got here. In this episode, we're going to get into all of the decisions that we've made along the way and things we were exposed to, especially in common, that have gotten us to this point today, for better or for worse. Before we get into it, we're going to introduce ourselves for those of you who are just finding our podcast for the first time. My name's Chrissy. I've been a certified registered nurse anesthetist for 6 years in various academic medical centers.
My name is Anna. I am a second-year student registered nurse anesthetist, and I also, like Chrissy, started off in a high acuity ICU. I then was a travel nurse throughout the pandemic. We connected in 2020, and we share a vision for educating and empowering critical care nurses. We own an education company, Confident Care Academy. That is the podcast that you are listening to today. We have all sorts of educational resources within the membership. Definitely check that out. But that leads us into today, which is talking about what are the things that we share in common? What is this common kind of origin story, if you will? Do you want to tell us a little bit about what led you here, Chrissy?
Okay, our hardcore ride or die community already know little bits and pieces of these stories, but I don't think anyone really knows the whole thing. Anna and I both come from a background where we were raised with pretty right-wing fundamentalist Christianity. We grew up in two really different environments. I grew up in a very progressive area, Long Island, New York. My town had a gay pride parade. All of my teachers were super progressive when I was in public school. But there was about a 10-year period where I was in a very extreme fundamentalist circle, Christian school and church. Church was anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. And I wasn't allowed to listen to non-Christian
secular
music for that entire decade. Nothing secular. Most television shows, other than Seinfeld, I know every Seinfeld episode. I got that memorized.
The conservatives love Seinfeld.
The conservatives love Seinfeld, which is funny because it's not a conservative show by any means. Anna has a very similar background story.
Yeah, so I was in this very conservative community overall. I grew up homeschooled K through 12. And within that, there were a lot of religious values and themes within the curriculum itself. I say that I have love for my parents. I know that they did what they thought was best for us at the time. I now no longer hold those same values. So it was very much a learning experience getting out of that sort of community at age 18 and onward. That was when I learned that evolution really happened. It wasn't just a theory, and the earth is not 6,000 years old. Weird. That was when I learned I learned a lot in college. It was pretty eye-opening overall. So growing up in this very insulated small community, there's about 18,000 people in my town. It's very homogenous. There was not a lot of diversity, not a lot of variability in thought processes either. So I very much grew up in a very, very sheltered environment. Same thing, no rock music, no secular music as a whole. And it was, of course, no Harry Potter, except I will say this.
Oh, no Harry Potter.
I wrote an essay. Harry Potter, yeah, absolutely not. But C.S. Lewis and, Tolkien were okay. So I think we share a lot in terms of the way that we grew up and the culture that we grew up in, church 3 to 5 times a week, and the expectations that specifically are set for women within these cultures. We both experienced, and I would say suffered from, the expectations or the lack of expectations of women within these communities, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I would love to dive into that more. It's really sad because I think unless you've experienced it yourself, it's hard to imagine. And sometimes when I talk on social media about, religious upbringing and how it affected who I became today, there's a lot of more modern or progressive Christians who have a really hard time maybe wrapping their head around it or believing that this is like what was experienced, or how pervasive and common it truly is in a lot of religious communities. And I think that right now with like the Duggar documentary that just came out and the Hillsong documentary that came out a few years ago, the American public is sort of waking up to how big of a movement these like grassroots fundamentalist churches really are, and how extreme some of the beliefs are and how pervasive they are. Like Anna said, my parents are really great people who really love me and did the best that they could with what they knew. They did not grow up very religious themselves. They were kind of Catholic light, you know, like Christmas and Easter Catholics. Creasters, yeah. They prayed. I was christened in the Catholic Church. They were married in the Catholic Church, but that's about it. It wasn't until I was about 4 or 5 years old that they, you know, found Protestant Christianity, got more into church. And it wasn't until I hit 3rd grade that I was pulled out of public school and went to Christian school. The focus was really on behavior and spirituality and training women to be a good mother and a good wife and a good spiritual leader of the household, or co-leader, I should say, because of course we were to submit to the men. But again, very little emphasis on encouraging me to take. We did have some AP classes in that school. There was no encouragement for me to do that there. Really just no investment in me as a woman at all, when there were a lot of people around me who were being pushed and invested in who were not of my gender.
I think that's so interesting that parents, especially parents who are first-time parents and they didn't necessarily go to graduate school, you're having kids for the first time and you're figuring this all out. You hear issues with the public education system, and a lot of times the assumption is that private education is better or that homeschool education is better, when in reality, some of these private options have far less resources than a well-funded public education system. It's very interesting because I think that all of these parents approach this from a mindset of, I want what's best for my kids, and they assume that the private Christian school is what's best for their kids, not realizing that the education of young women in these schools particularly is divested from. And I think this is something that is just poorly understood, especially people who aren't in the education sector or who don't have a STEM background, right? Because like you're just a parent navigating this for the first time, and you think that if it's more expensive, it must be better, right? But it's actually not the case all the time.
That is such a good point. I mean, these schools, my parents did not have a lot of money at the time, but they scraped together. So my mom went back to work just to pay for me to go to this school because they thought it would be better for me. Smaller classroom sizes, it's a private education. Like they really thought they were doing what was best. But we did live in a school district in New York that was very well funded. And the public education there was amazing. So when I went back to public school, I had teachers who, for the first time, really pushed me and encouraged me. And when I told them what colleges I was applying to, they were like, why don't you apply to more? Like, why don't you try for more? And they were, you know, always encouraging me to just reach my full potential and really invested in me personally. You know, that being said, I think both of us share this story of coming from a place where we really had to fight for a place to be educated. And it did set us back in many ways. I really wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, but you know, I was told that, you know, scientists were anti-God and that being a doctor meant I couldn't be a good Christian mother and a good Christian wife, and that I was really discouraged from it, from the entire community. It was something that you just didn't do. So I did everything I could to find something else I was interested in instead. And that's part of how I ended up where I did today. Did you experience something similar?
I also, as I talk about this, I know that if my mom is listening, this will be hard to hear. I want to just emphasize once again that a lot of the takeaways from growing up were not from my family necessarily, as much as it was from the community. And my disagreements and where I delineate and where I no longer align is with the values of that community. I do not question that my parents love me and that they did what they did out of love. The community that I grew up in was not supportive of women pursuing higher education. The homeschool group that I graduated with, 6 out of 24 ended up pursuing college. That is lower than the national average by quite a good bit. And the women were encouraged even less to pursue higher education than the men were within this community. There's a lot, you can talk that all day that you don't need a college degree to do well in a trade. I was, like Chrissy, someone who was very inquisitive from a young age. I borderline argumentative in high school. Shocker. And I loved school. I thrived in school. I also had, asked for certain opportunities that didn't end up presenting themselves in my childhood. And I did not have a very strong basis in STEM. And that caused a little bit of self-doubt, but I still, at one point or another, I remember talking about going to medical school and being discouraged from that as well, because that was a value set within the community that you could not be a physician and a mother. And it was always the most important thing to be a mother and to be a good Christian wife. And that is something that I think even men who grow up in the same community that we do, they did not have that same experience. So I think when they look back on their childhoods and on their high school experience, they'll see the positives of that community and of the values of the community, but they were never held back in terms of aspirations and career aspirations, or encouraged away from. I think even people within the community would hesitate to say that they wouldn't encourage women doctors, because that sounds crazy to say. But if it's their cousin, or if it's their niece or their daughter who has these aspirations, the energy might be, are you sure you want to do that? That's a lot of work, and you might not be able to be a mom if you pursue that. And they would not see that as discouraging you from pursuing the career. They would say that they were being realistic, because in part, it's based off of their own experiences where they were not offered the opportunities to pursue either college or graduate school. So they are speaking out of their own experiences as well, but then they're passing that on to the next generation in a way that doesn't happen with families who don't have that conservative religious mindset. So all of that being said, yeah, I grew up in a small homeschool community in rural North Carolina, and I married into the same religious organization that the Duggars were a part of, if that gives you any sort of context for the level of pervasive cultural issues that were involved within that kind of sect of religion. I will even say this: the values and the beliefs that are held by the Advanced Training Institute and by the IBLP are not broadly held by even the majority of other people who would identify as evangelical Christians. I was also involved in the church planting that is detailed in The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. I was 19 and 20 years old at the time. I was very young. I was very much still within that community. I am now deconstructed, and I do not identify as religious anymore. But this is one of those things that the reason that I had the opportunity to deconstruct was education. And I don't know if you guys read Educated. It really resonated with me from someone who grew up within this culture that was very... people who are within the culture hesitate and they cringe when they hear the word fundamentalist, but the values are they're fundamentalist values, and they will say that they want, the traditional wife and mother within the home, so that you're homeschooling your children, you're raising them up to walk in the ways of the Lord and all of this stuff. So once again, this is not about my parents and about my family. It's about the values of the community that I now no longer align with. So yes, as a graduating senior, I was encouraged to, I'll say this: when I was graduating from high school, my parents encouraged me to pursue ballet. They loved that I was passionate, and they were supporting me to the greatest extent that they could. So my parents did send me to college. That is a testament to them. I will keep saying again and again, my issues are with the values of the community, not with the values necessarily of my parents. I love you, Mom and Dad. So I think that feeds into the next thing, which is, how does nursing tie into all of this?
Because you're being prepared as a woman to be a mother and a wife, you are put into very adult roles at a very young age. In my case, there's a very big emphasis on behavior as a reflection of parents' ability to be spiritual leaders in the home. So again, this is so funny to me, because my parents really are very much not of this mindset now, and they weren't before either. And even along the way, I think they were pretty reasonable people. I don't think they themselves were ever that extreme. I just think they had no idea how extreme everyone else was around them, because people are very bold behind closed doors at what they'll say to children. In my own personal life, I feel that I was, and I talk about this with my parents openly. Again, we have a really good relationship today, and we always have. But I was definitely parentified at a young age. And if, for those of you who don't know what that phrase means, it's when a child is essentially put in a very adult role, a role like a parent. And that can happen for many different reasons. If you read about parentification, sometimes it happens in the homes of people who have substance use. For example, the child might have to step up and mother other siblings, or even mother or parent their own parents, the parent who is a victim of substance use. That's a very common example of where that occurs. In the case of someone who, like myself, my older sister who had autism spectrum disorder, and she, required a lot of extra attention. And my dad traveled a lot and worked a lot to make ends meet. My sister, was a lot of work for my mom and expended a lot of her energy. So even though I don't think my mom intended to do this, there was a lot of time spent for me as a child taking care of everything I could in the home to make my parents' lives as easy as possible. Trying to be the perfect child so that when my dad got home from travel and he was stressed and exhausted, that he could have rest. And so that my mom, when she was stressed and exhausted from doing all the things to run the household because my dad was gone and my sister needed a lot of care, so that my mom could have help and have rest. And as a child, my focus was naturally on taking care of everybody's needs around me instead of my own. Just naturally from that family dynamic. Again, my parents never put me in that situation intentionally. It's just kind of like the role you take on as a child when you're in these circumstances. And adding on the fundamentalist Christianity to that is this sense of like duty, being a perfect kid, being good for God. God is always watching you. It's like Santa Claus on steroids, right? The elf on the shelf. You tell a white lie and you lay in bed completely guilty for like doing the smallest thing wrong. The guilt that you bear as a child. Obey your parent.
It's children obey your parents as unto the Lord.
These hyper spiritual environments, there's an intense level of guilt that comes with not being perfect. So I was parentified at a young age, which really caused me to see myself in life as a helper and a fixer. And it's what drew me into medicine. And ultimately, when I couldn't be a doctor, what's the female appropriate alternative to doctoring in these communities?
Nursing.
Well, you can be a nurse. And Anna, I would love to hear your own experience with parentification, because I know as the oldest of 6 children, I'm sure that happened to you as well. I have no doubt in my mind about that.
Similar to Chrissy, I share some similar experiences. I'm the oldest of 6 children within this same cultural mindset of how women are socialized and raised to be helpmeets, and even the Keepers at Home movement, if anybody has read that book, you are socialized to be a caregiver from a really young age. I will say this, I had work outside of the home, and it was more of a pervasive cultural thing within the religious community that I was expected to be a helper. And there were 2 jobs that really came to mind that were very acceptable that women could have, and they are nursing and teaching. So I was socialized from a pretty young age to be pro-nurse and pro-teaching. And also tying just back into that religious aspect, there is this pervasive need that we will tell young children that they have to not only keep everyone fed and clothed and warm, but also save everyone from,
HE double hockey sticks.
From eternal hell. So when you are a young child and you think that everyone who doesn't believe exactly the same things that you do will be in pain forever, that's extremely stressful. So, I, as an empathetic young person, wanted everyone to go to heaven with me. And I then also picked up on all of the other social cues that I was supposed to within my community, which was clothing and feeding people, and then looking into a whole job 40 hours a week where I would be healing people as well. And nursing was a really natural progression of that. And that was also valued and, respected within the community that I grew up in. So nursing was a very natural next step. And what do you have to say about all that, Chrissy?
Oh my God. So I think it's so profound what you just talked about with that need to save people coming from that fear of, not only are you told that everyone who doesn't believe in Jesus is going to go to hell, and that hell is a horrible place of eternal torment, right? It's like the worst thing you can imagine. And we watch these crazy movies. Like, did you see Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames? Was that shown to you?
I did not see that.
Oh, it's a good one.
But I was very big into the Left Behind series. All of the like spiritual warfare stuff.
These apocalyptic movies. You're going to be driving down the road. Your mom's going to get raptured, meaning just disappear into thin air, for those of you who didn't experience this. And you're going to be left behind. And then and all the people who were left behind, the lukewarm Christians, the ones who weren't Christian enough, they all are going to have to deal with the tribulation, the persecution of the church.
The 7 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Horrible. Like disease, famine, like the earth on fire. The earth is on fire, guys, by the way.
The 7 hottest days in the last 100,000 years are in the last week. So the earth is on fire, but not for these reasons. Yeah.
It is actually happening. Not for these reasons.
That's an aside.
Anyway. It's interesting though, because this idea of, and this is something I'm really excited to tie in here, this idea of evangelizing was really emphasized from a young age. And we had a lot of practice as a result, both of us, with public speaking. This is so funny. I'm so embarrassed now. And by the way, my parents, they do not go to this church anymore, guys. Like, they are not on board.
We love Mr. and Mr. Macero.
They just didn't know. Anyway, but we got this like practice public speaking at a very young age because of it, getting up in church and giving testimonies and the microphone to like several hundred people was a routine thing for me. Speaking at youth group, teaching Sunday school. Our church would go to the Jones Beach Boardwalk and hand out tracts. For those of you guys who don't know what tracts are, they're these little cartoon pamphlets that are really cute and funny, like the comic strips that you see in the newspaper. And then there's a plot twist at the end where you go to hell if you don't believe in Jesus. So this community has essentially taught us, A, you have to be a perfect person. B, you have to be a good mother and a good wife. C, you have to help everyone around you. D, you have to save everyone around you. And, and then on top of all that, here's all this really great training actually in public speaking. No wonder we're all on TikTok. Guys, most of your favorite like TikTok people who talk about like social justice or like any sort of thing, they all grew up in similar communities, and we all were given microphones at a really young age.
Oh yeah.
I really think that's why we're all on the internet now. It's just natural to us.
I can argue that it is a step along the deconstruction journey is to find a social media presence. I am like,
become an influencer.
So in high school, which I'm actually very grateful for this opportunity, I had like public speaking and debate club in high school. Like this was a fully entrenched component of the community, was learning how to speak in public and learning how to, oh my gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? Apologist. To be a Christian apologist was like the best thing that you could be, to defend the faith and to be able to argue from a scientific reason why this very small lens looking at Christianity is like the only correct interpretation. Anyway, so like that was very much valued within the communities that I was a part of. And it's very interesting to then now, Chrissy and I both were on this trajectory of, we were taught how to speak in public so that we could perpetuate the work of the kingdom. And then we learned, that climate change is real and that the powers that be, namely, exploiting the working class and racism, classism, exploitation, all are bad things. So then when we find out these new topics, oh my gosh. And the pandemic was really the catalyst for me for this entire deconstruction plus pandemic, plus being a people pleaser, plus being an ICU nurse and the need to save everyone, all really came together to make this kind of pressure cooker situation that was very interesting. And that's when we met, was in the middle of 2020. And I believe wholeheartedly that I thought at the time, as a new ICU nurse in 2020, I think I was 24 at the time, and I was actively deconstructing. I was peeling back layers, journaling all the time, crying. Like, it's very hard. Deconstructing is a very emotionally draining and very heavy process. So in the middle of all of that, I also then am given a microphone, if you will, as a COVID ICU nurse working during the pandemic. And I'm like, you know what I can do with this? I can save everyone. I can get them to get the vaccine and wear their masks. This is great. I'm not saving them from spiritual, poor outcomes. I'm saving them from COVID-19. So all of this mental energy for me funneled into trying to save as many people as I could from the pandemic, all while working like 60-hour contracts in the COVID ICU, right?
I was just going to say, think about how young you were. And I don't think, so a lot of our audience is in this age category. I don't think people realize how young that truly is. And I resented it so much when I was a new grad nurse and everyone was like, you're so young, you're so young. I was like, I'm a professional, I'm an adult. I watch people die every day.
I'm a real grown-up, Mom. I was not a grown-up. I was a kid in some ways.
Well, yes and no, right? Being a nurse grows you up extremely fast. Your frontal lobe isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old, regardless. In this window, these 21 to 25-year-old nurses are seeing heinous things that most people will never experience in their lifetime. And you don't realize what an impact on your development that really makes, or how much it really kind of rocks your world. And it's a huge reason why there's, so much burnout, all that moral injury. Even if you work under perfect conditions, perfect ratios, perfect pay, it's still hard to watch people die every day. And it's a very jarring experience when you have a friend who went into marketing, or a friend who, is an influencer or whatever, and or a partner, right? And you're watching people die, and then you come home and then they're complaining about a deadline or a mean boss. And I think that was a very jarring experience for me as a young adult in the ICU.
And we're 23, 24 at the time. That is so young to be coaching families through end-of-life conversations and holding space and empathy for countless people dying throughout COVID. And that being your entire responsibility as a 23-year-old I completely agree. It's very heavy. And then to couple that with the disassociation of the people in your peer groups being frustrated about a deadline for an email is wild. That's a very crazy experience for someone to go through whose frontal lobe is not developed yet. I completely agree.
I want to talk a little bit more about, deconstructing and how that kind of got us to where we are now. So again, I think we started out on this journey of being young women who were naturally smart and hardworking, and then were encouraged to be hard workers, that Protestant work ethic, to be helpers, to save people, to get practice in public speaking, have these microphones, right? We end up on social media as a result of all that. We end up as nurses as a result of all that. And then now we're in this space of, again, Anna's big trigger point for deconstructing was the pandemic. For me, it was actually Christian college. Well, I found the Christian school within driving. So I looked up Christian schools within driving distance that had social work programs that were approved by New York State, because I thought I was going to be a social worker, again, trying to save the world. My first degree was not nursing. And then I found the one that met all those requirements, and I went through the list and looked at the schools with the least amount of rules.
Liberty is out. What is it? West Palm Beach or Palm Beach Atlantic out.
Liberty did not make the cut. I had friends who went there. I nixed a lot of places, and I found Eastern University, which was in the Philadelphia suburbs. And let me tell you, this is the best. This is probably one of the best things that has ever happened to me, was my parents funneling me to Eastern University, because Eastern, they are a Christian college with a huge emphasis on social justice. In fact, freshman year, your first semester, you have to take this class called Faith, Reason, and Justice. I feel like the scales came off my eyes of how the world really worked. We also had to take Old Testament, New Testament, and theology, and do service learning. So like certain number of hours of community service. So my community service for my freshman year requirement was to go to Broad Street Ministry in Philadelphia, where there was this church there who is really awesome, by the way. I really encourage you guys, if you're into church, this is not an episode to tell you guys you can't be a Christian, because there are a lot of Christians who are doing really great stuff out there and who do not hold these beliefs. And Broad Street Ministry is one of these places. They have a huge homelessness ministry. They do free HIV testing. They feed people in a community setting. So instead of like a soup kitchen, you go and you sit down like with each other as a community and eat together. So I had all this exposure to like social justice. And then in my Bible class, Old Testament 1 is like, everything's a parable. None of it's meant to be taken literally. And the rug was pulled out from under me. I was like, wait a second. The world is horrible. Evolution's real. None of the Bible is meant to be taken literally. What? So my deconstruction journey started there. Going into ICU nursing after that really just continued this journey of deconstruction for me again, just seeing, tragedy after tragedy, and then kind of like unraveling that was really helpful for me to pivot my focus from being a good Christian and being a good spiritual, friend and helper to channeling my energy into, if it's not really about saving people spiritually, and there really might not be a remaking of the heaven and the earth, as I was taught. That's something that Christians are taught, right? This earth is going to expire. It has an expiration date, and then God's going to make a new one. So that's why protecting the environment is not really important to these communities. They think it's all going to get thrown out, like probably soon. And like God's just going to come and remake it again. What then is my responsibility if I can't pray for my communities and have God fix it? Now the responsibility on me is to do something about it, right? The responsibility is on us to protect the physical planet, to get the message out about like COVID-19, to, resolve these inequities in society. And that's where, nursing and workers' rights movements come into play. Like, this is where I start to get the interest in workers' rights and labor movements. Like, it's kind of wild how like this kind of all pivots and changes. I would love to hear your experience on that.
I'm completely in agreement with Chrissy. I think that everyone's relationship with God or spirituality, if it gives you purpose and meaning and comfort in this life, that's amazing. I think for both Chrissy and I, we delineate and no longer align with the affiliations we were affiliated with in the past. If your spirituality helps you love your community better, that's amazing. And we love that. It has been very interesting, especially I love hearing about that one church that really lives out the do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God, taking care of your communities. Love that. Like, especially, I think if churches did more of social justice and more caring about the environment and caring for the unhoused people in their communities. I think I saw a statistic that if every single church in America housed one unhoused person and then took like a quarter of a child out of the foster care system or helped with reuniting them with their biological family, there would be no unhoused people and there would be no foster children. So I think like there's so much room for good within those institutions, but because of our personal experiences within those affiliations, we no longer practice. Anyway, all of that being said, the deconstruction into, okay, well then what now has been such an interesting transition. And I think for Chrissy and I both, one of the biggest things tying people to religion is like the fear of the unknown and the fear of death on the other side. personally, I've seen enough death that it's not really scary to me anymore. I think that it's a natural process. It's a continuation of life. And I've seen so much, and I'm only 27, like, but I've seen a lot of people die. And I think that it can be done in a way that gives a lot of meaning to someone's life. I think you can die with dignity. I think you can die surrounded by the people who love you. And plus or minus an afterlife, I think that you can live a life that is full of meaning and purpose here on earth, and that I'm no longer personally afraid of death. So if you take that piece away from it, because that's really the big fear factor, right? Is the like, okay, well, what happens after? If you can take that piece and remove it, then you're left to look around you like, okay, well, what do we have to do here while I'm on earth? And I think from that perspective shift caused a lot of anxiety initially of like, oh my gosh, if that's the case, we need to make everything right here on earth. Like there's a lot of injustices now that we need to fix. So I entered into there was a period where I was trying to be like zero waste, vegan, like try to do everything perfect. As a not religious person, I was like, I need to be like as ethically like good as I can to try to alleviate suffering for the most people possible. And then the next step of the deconstruction along that is like, okay, you're one person and you can't undo everything. And you're also allowed to enjoy like some of the beauties of nature, you know, like you're allowed to go on a hike and enjoy that. You're allowed to build community with your friends and enjoy it. You don't have to be 24/7 only trying to help other people. So that has been like an ongoing process too. And I think you kind of end up having to pick. And I'm not an expert here. I'm 27 years old. I've got a lot more to learn. But I find that what helps me mentally with this is like picking a few things that you can be really knowledgeable about and trying to pull other people with you on those topics and trying to kind of center your energy on a few things. So for me, a few of those things are critical care education for nurses. And I love unions and I love labor rights and nursing unions specifically. I also am learning more and I'm very passionate about reproductive justice and about reproductive health. I can't then also be a water rights activist, an environmental activist, a zero waste activist. You can't do everything. So if you need permission to kind of focus your energy on a few things, I guess this is your permission. Like pick one or two things that you can like volunteer or learn a lot about and try to just like build community where you are. And you also are one person and you can't save the world by yourself.
One thing that I think these communities, and this is one thing I'll say in favor of, you know, being part of a church community, we can only do things in community, right? We are only one person. You can't be an expert in everything. You can't champion every cause. But as communities and as grassroots organizations, there's power in numbers and there's power in coming together for better or for worse, right? But one thing that I think attracts people to the upbringing that we had is that they do a really good job at community. And this is something that a lot of Americans lack based on, you know, and it's multifactorial. You know, we have a very individualistic values as a culture and a society. We also have, you know, jobs and work lives that pull us in different directions. We work a lot of hours during the week. We don't get a lot of paid time off. We also have very physically spread out areas. We don't all live in dense, walkable cities and walkable communities like lots of other countries do. We are in suburbs where we're spread out with land. So a lot of these things lead us to be very isolated as Americans, and church communities provide a really beautiful community setup. When somebody was sick or someone died or anything would happen, there's meal chains that come around and take care of you. And there's people 24/7 just showing up. When my sister died, the people from my old church, they all rented a van together, came down, even though my parents hadn't lived there in 7 years, and rented hotels and stayed in the area and cooked for my family, ordered food for us, like cleaned our house. I mean, and just like sat with my parents and cried with them. I mean, the community is very powerful and very beautiful. And, you know, when we want to affect change, I want to give you guys permission to, again, not be perfect, not be everything to everyone, but we have to find ways to develop communities that are healthy and that are impactful, because there's something really beautiful about that and really empowering there, right? We do need to show up for our friends and create chosen families, and together promote the values that we want to promote. And, maybe for you that does look like getting involved in a church like Broad Street Ministry, or maybe for you it means having a friend group, and one of the things you guys do is volunteer your time for trans rights, for labor rights, for environmental activism, for whatever it is, get or volunteer for an organization. Finding community and plugging in is good for you, and it's the way that change occurs.
And I agree. You also can't do it all. And Chrissy said the same thing. If you want to see any change in the world, you're going to have a community get together and make that change happen. So that has been a huge learning curve, but then also it's so freeing in a way that if you make meaningful investments of your time and energy back into your community, there's a ripple effect there that you won't necessarily see all the time. I mean, even in faith-based organizations, we would say all the time, I'm just planting seeds, But if you take that same principle and apply it to labor rights, you educate one person about unions, then who knows how many other people they're going to tell, If you are able to advocate and then put your time and money behind trans rights or LGBTQ plus rights, then who knows how many lives that'll touch. Working with the unhoused people in your community, you don't see the full effects of everything that you do in the moment. And you also can't do everything alone. You shouldn't do everything alone. But when you invest time into a community, it's something that it will grow. You have the one insular hour a week that you're volunteering. Okay, well, you don't see the ripple effects 10 years down the road. So just encouraging y'all in that way. If you find something that's meaningful to you and you're investing time there, keep it up. It does make a difference. It's not pointless. I think hopelessness is a phase that sometimes happens after deconstruction. If there's not this value system that I had held tight to my entire life, then what's the purpose? And I want to counter that it's actually beautiful to think of the world being just what exists right now, because you have the power to make it a little bit better for people in this moment right now. And you also have the power to enjoy this experience, because you're not guaranteed tomorrow. You're not guaranteed an afterlife necessarily. Maybe you believe that. That's okay if you do. But I think it's actually very beautiful that you can enact change in the day-to-day life that you're living right now. And I want to just encourage you with that.
I love that you're kind of circling it back to just encouraging the people who are listening, because I think a lot of the people who listen to our podcast are very much like us. Maybe they didn't all share the same fundamentalist upbringing, but most of you guys are nurses. And if you're not nurses, maybe you're in medical school or PA school, but you all went into a helping profession if you're listening to this episode. And so a lot of you guys might have had parallel life experiences of feeling the need to save people, feeling, the need to be right, feeling the need to be good for one reason or another. We all kind of share that trait, or at least most of us do. And we also tend to be very, highly empathetic and all of these things, where we all feel a lot and care a lot about a lot of different things. That's also why, by the way, guys, we started Confident Care Academy. For me personally, the story goes, pivoting into nursing as a second degree, 12-month accelerated program, never stepped foot in an ICU, going straight into the cardiac surgery ICU at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, top hospital, top cardiac surgery program. Patients are extremely sick. My sister had just died of an aortic aneurysm rupture. Now all of my patients have aortic aneurysms all of a sudden. It was a very intense and traumatic experience for me to go into this high stakes ICU with this incredible pressure on myself to be perfect, A, because of my upbringing and natural personality, and B, now because of what had just happened to my sister. I really felt incredible guilt that I didn't catch the signs and make her go to the ER sooner. I put this incredible pressure on myself to be a perfect nurse. And then when there was no educational resources out there to help me learn, I just read everything I could. I read every up-to-date article, every Medscape article, everything I could get my little fingers on so that I could take good care of my patients. Because if I missed something again for any person that came through my ICU, I would never forgive myself. This is why we care so much about empowering nurses, or why I care so much about empowering nurses. Nurses are smart people. They're capable people. And every single one of you cares deeply about what you're doing. That's why you're here in the first place. And there's nothing more frustrating to me in the world than wanting to know why or how, and people giving you an oversimplified explanation because they don't think you're worthy of knowing the details. They don't think you need to know the details, but in reality you do. Because when you know the why, you don't forget, and you'll always know what to assess for, what to look out for, how, like, what things mean. You can catch things sooner and quicker and call in help and articulate it better so that people believe you and listen to you. These are the things that empower us to take better care of our communities. You don't have to be perfect as a nurse. It's not possible. You will make mistakes. You will miss things. But by educating nurses, it's kind of like my way of, I guess, still doing the same frickin' thing that I've always been doing, right? Like trying to save the world. It's kind of nuts. But I just have this belief in my head that, like, I have this, if I can get the people who are Confident Care Academy members, or even just people who listen to the podcast or the short form social media with like just the little sound bites of free education we give out, if I can help you guys understand how to use your pulse ox better, if I can help you guys understand how to read your ABG better, if I can help you guys understand how this drug works so that you don't make an error, you're going to teach that to the people you precept. And you're going to have, unit-wide change and generational change that's going to ripple down to our communities having better care overall. And I hope that nurses continue to demand more for their education on the units and more in schools, and, continue to dig deeper on their own, because you guys are capable and you're talented and you're smart. That's why you're here. And you're going to make impacts on your communities, even though sometimes it doesn't always feel that way, even though sometimes the patients die anyway. Helping someone die with dignity or doing everything you can so that the family has peace is still very significant.
We believe in nurses. For all the times that people didn't believe in us, we believe in you guys. And we want to open doors for people who come after us to take really good care of their patients and to then take good care of their community. We know that one really educated nurse on a unit who is empowered by all of this education and knowledge is going to teach new grads, and then those new grads are going to teach other new grads, and then they are going to take such better care of their patients, which is improving the health of your communities overall. We believe in y'all, and we also appreciate the trust, and we also wanted to open up about kind of what brought us here so that you can understand like what's going on inside of our little brains all the time. Because I think, like Chrissy said, a lot of y'all share a lot of this in common with us. So we were really excited to kind of open up about our past and how that brought us to where we are today. Who knows where that will bring us to in the future? Hopefully universal health care. That's like a 2050 goal. We'll see if we get there. But please like and subscribe. Please comment what you want to hear from us next time. Check out the Confident Care Academy membership if you want that in-depth critical care education. And check out the podcast for all of these free resources. We are so appreciative of this community that we have here, and we will see y'all next time.